Alrighty, so if you're in the same position as me, you might have just come across your first aphids of the gardening season. And I know that it can be a little bit deflating, a little bit disheartening, but what I want you to do is first take a big, deep breath and know that this is an absolute inevitability. We're gonna come across them. And on top of that, it is absolutely not going to ruin our gardening season. And thirdly is that over the course of this video, I'm gonna walk you through 5 steps for you to be ultimately managing and getting rid of aphids in your garden this season. Now, as we get started here, if you do have any questions related to aphids or anything gardening specific, go ahead and leave those down in the comments. I start every one of my days having a cup of coffee, sitting on the couch, and answering every question that we receive. So you're gonna get a response from me super quickly. And when it comes to aphids, or really any garden pest or disease for that matter, we don't want to jump directly into actions, but rather we want to take a little bit of a step back and utilize a 5-step process called integrated pest management to begin working with and managing that pest or disease that we've come across. And the very first step of integrated pest management is identification. So when it comes to aphids, we're looking for small insects about the size of a breadcrumb, and they're going to be pear-shaped, and they come in all kinds of colors. They could be gray or black, green, red, and more. And you're primarily going to find them on the bottom side of leaves or kind of living and breathing on new growth on the plant. So as you make your rounds through the garden, make sure that you're inspecting your plants and looking at the back side of the leaves and on any of the new growth, and seeing if you can identify any aphids that might be living in and around those areas. And lastly, it's totally common to be coming across multiples of them in one area, so don't be surprised for there to be a little cluster of 5 of them, 10 of them, all the way up to 50 or 100 of them. And so once we have identified properly that this is an aphid that we're dealing with, the second step of integrated pest management is evaluation. So to evaluate the severity of the aphid infestation, you're going to want to inspect all the leaves on the plant and all the other plants of that variety. So for instance, these red Russian kale plants that I have are where I first spotted aphids this season. And so as I spotted them on the first couple of leaves, I then started looking at each of the other leaves on that plant, and then I made my way over to the other red Russian kale plants that I had in that bed. Now on top of that, I also had 2 other types of kale in this same bed. So once I finished with the red Russian kale, I then made my way over to the lacinato kale to look at all of those leaves, as well as the scarlet kale on the end. Now fortunately, I caught them super early on, so it hadn't developed into a large colony or infestation, anything along those lines. And I've now made kind of a mental note of that in terms of my evaluation, that there's a couple on the plants, but there's not yet any large colonies or infestation. And that brings me into step number 3 of integrated pest management, and that is tolerance. And this is a really, really important part of the overall management strategy, because each of us are going to have different tolerance levels. Do you want to have absolutely 0 pests or disease on your plants, 0 aphids in this instance? Are you okay with there being 1 or 2 like we just saw on my plants there? Or are you okay with there potentially being even more than that? What is your tolerance level? And it's super important that you know what your tolerance level is, because that is what's going to inform step 4, which is action. And so what I'm going to walk us through next are 3 actions that you can be taking to manage aphids in your garden that are super, super easy and straightforward. But just before we dive into those, for those of you that I have not met before, I'm Jordan from Mind and Soil, where we're looking to introduce 1 million individuals to gardening's mental health benefits. So if you're looking for more peacefulness, more joy, more restoration in your life, then I really encourage you to subscribe to our channel here, because we put out new videos every single week, just like this one, to take as much of the guesswork out of gardening as possible, to be helping you tap into its mental health benefits and how great it feels to be in the garden. So when it comes to the now actions that we can be taking to manage the aphids in our garden and get them down to a level that is beneath our tolerance level, the first one of those is to go around and just squish them. So for this approach, all that you need to be doing is, while you're making your rounds, inspecting your plants, if you come across any aphids, all that you're doing is grabbing your fingers and just really squishing them against the leaf. And then just like that, the leaf is cleared of the aphids there. This approach is actually really, really effective. But if you didn't want to be utilizing your hands directly on the aphids, the second action that you could be taking is spraying them with your hose. And so what you're going to do is grab your hose and put it onto something like the flat setting, so it's not like a complete jet that's going to break the plant, and then just begin to spray the areas that you have spotted the aphids on your plants. So on the back of those leaves, just work the hose over top of them, getting them all sprayed off there. Aphids are soft-bodied, so just the amount of pressure coming out of the hose is going to be enough to at least dislodge them, but most likely ultimately kill them so they don't crawl back onto the plant there. And this is a really good approach, especially in those areas where there's new growth, where it's a little bit more difficult to be squishing them in those areas. And now the third action that you could be taking is something maybe a little bit more intense, and that's creating a little bit of an organic spray. So for this, what you're going to do is grab a spray bottle, and then you're going to grab 1 teaspoon of neem oil and put that into the bottle. And then you're going to grab 2 to 3 drops of Dr. Bronner's soap and pop those into the bottle. And then you're going to fill it up with 4 liters or 1 gallon of water. Give that a really good mix, and then go back out to your plants where you spotted the aphids, and now you're going to spray this directly on the aphids where you find them on the plants. And what's happening here is that the neem oil serves as an organic pesticide that's ultimately going to kill them off, and the soap is going to help kind of mix that all in and then ultimately cover their body as well. Now, with that being said, I would say that those that are practicing really organic and sustainable and regenerative gardening practices are beginning to move away from utilizing neem oil. I think that's just kind of what I've been observing in the space. The reason for that is because it really is a pesticide, and it is not going to only impact that aphid, but rather any other pests, insects, microbes that it interacts with. Ultimately, it could be killing some of them off as well. And so for myself, I'm not here to say what's the right approach to gardening or the wrong approach to gardening, but rather just kind of educating on all the different options that could be available there, such as those 3 ways to be handling aphids. Now, the really critical piece of information on this front is that this is not going to be like a one-time fix, but rather whichever action you decide to take, you're going to want to be doing that action essentially either every day or every other day for 10 to 14 days. So think about this as kind of like a 14-day period that you're going to be really trying to manage that aphid infestation and get it as low as possible. The reason why this is so important is because aphids multiply really, really fast. One aphid can reproduce and create up to 80 to around 100 new aphids every single week. So we really want to be proactive on our management strategy to get that population down to the tolerance level and ultimately as low as possible. And so after day 14, and even throughout that, it brings us to our 5th and final step of integrated pest management, and that is to be monitoring your plant. So as you go through those 14 days and beyond, make sure that you're going out there monitoring and inspecting the back of those leaves, the area where there's new growth, and see, is the number of aphids beginning to decrease? What you're probably going to notice is that by the end of 14 days, there won't be too many aphids around. But once again, you're going to want to continue to be monitoring and identifying them, and then taking the appropriate actions to ensure that that population stays below your tolerance level. And that's the beauty of integrated pest management. And so the last piece that I want to touch on is just what's my personal approach to managing aphids in my garden. So my tolerance level is that I'm okay having a couple of them on my plants. I by no means think that I'm going to be able to get the population down to 0. And the way that I go about doing that is really 3-pronged, I would say. First, I really focus on inspecting my plants and being proactive on my strategy. And then once I do come across them, the primary thing that I'm doing and that I've found to be most effective is squishing them. So I'll go around and I'll just simply squish them off on the leaves, and that ensures that they're not getting kind of just blown off with a little bit of water from the hose and then potentially climbing back up, but rather that they're dead, they're not going to be able to reproduce. The one time that I do utilize the hose is on the areas where there is new growth, because these leaves are a little bit smaller, a little bit more tender, and I find that the hose does a bit of a better job getting in there than my big clumsy fingers. So that is the way that I go about managing aphids in my garden. And I know that if you utilize integrated pest management and some of those actions, that you're going to have tons of success managing them and then ultimately getting really beautiful produce and harvests out of your garden. I really hope this video has been helpful. If you do have any questions, leave those down in the comments here. Other than that, I can't wait to catch you on the next video. Go get those hands dirty, and I'll see you soon.